I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Alex Tapscott, who is an entrepreneur and investor. Alex, you're also, of course, the author. Most recently, I think this is your fourth book, Web3. So nice to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too.
Are you in sunny Toronto right now?
Sunny Toronto, yes. Well, we have a little bit of smoke in the air still from the Quebec wildfires, but yes, it's quite nice out.
So let's start with Web3 because it is a term, of course, we keep hearing. We've been hearing it for some time. You define it for us, in terms of why a book and why now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it turns out that the internet and with it the web are entering a new era known as Web3. And I think it's helpful in order to understand what Web3 is to actually define what Web1 and Web2 are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the internet itself was actually invented in the late 1960s as an initiative of the Department of Defense to create a decentralized communication network that could keep running in the event of a nuclear attack. But it didn't really get commercialized until much later in the 1990s with the invention of the World Wide Web and the web browser. The era that we think of as sort of the .com era, the period that sort of lasted most of the 90s, is what we now refer to as the so-called read web or Web 1. And basically at the time, the web was kind of like
eyeballs, right? It was
eyeballs. It was all about broadcast medium, very much like almost like TV and radio. A lot of the iconic businesses of the .com era were in a way sort of versions of what came before, right? Things like encyclopedias or news sites and so forth. It was a way to consume content. And even though it was kind of primitive by today's standards, it was nevertheless revolutionary because it democratized access to internet, at least for people who had an internet connection, which was relatively few people. And that's how the web progressed for a period of time. In the early 2000s, the combination of the crash of the .com and also the introduction of some new technologies created the conditions for a new kind of web to emerge, what we now describe as Web 2 or the read-write web. So not only was the web a way to consume information, it was actually a tool that allowed us to upload our own data, to reprogram the web, to build communities, and to collaborate online. So it went from what you can think of as like a broadcast medium to more of a social medium.
Right.
And the defining businesses of Web 2, I think most people would agree, are social media companies.
Yeah, the Facebooks, the Googles, actually less the Googles, but definitely, I agree.
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, and also with the rise of the smartphone, a lot of geospatial applications, things like Uber, and Airbnb, TaskRabbit, and so on and so forth. And what was really remarkable about Web 2 is it democratized publishing. So anybody could be, a photo blogger, anybody could be a citizen journalist, anybody could, post their opinions, for better or for worse.
Right.
And that was important, I think, and overall a big positive. But what ended up happening was that all of this user-generated content created enormous amounts of value, but not necessarily for the individuals who created it, but rather for the large platforms who took this groundswell of engagement and built these closed-off, gated, communities where you as a user created lots of data, but the platform ended up extracting that and capturing a lot of the value. And I think now a lot of people look back at this Faustian bargain, if you will, the idea of trading our data for access to free services, as sort of a raw deal. And I think at this point in time, you could make the case that the web needs a rethink. And fortunately, we now have the technology tools to have that rethink, and that's the promise of Web 3. So Web 3,
blockchain, and tell us a little bit about those tools.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe as a quick diversion, we can talk about blockchains for a second. I think most people associate blockchains.
I see beside your head there. Is that that's your symbol of the blockchain?
Yes, exactly. Yes, absolutely. Well, if the first era of the web was the read web and the second era of the web is the read-write web, then you can think of Web 3 as the read, write, and own web, or the web of ownership. So not only is the web a way to consume content, not only is it a way to publish information and to create community online, but it's actually a way for us to own, the digital assets, the native assets of the digital age. And that is things like our data, our identities, our virtual goods, and our digital assets. So things like money and other financial goods. And that is a really important shift. The first two eras of the web, you can think of as being the eras of the Internet of Information, where Internet users were exactly that, users. We're now shifting to a new paradigm where Internet users are becoming Internet owners. All of that is only possible because of blockchains. Until blockchains came about, we actually had no way of representing value digitally, right? So if you think about how we use the internet, if I send you, an email, for example, with a PDF attachment, I can send that same email to a million other people. So when it comes to information, that's useful. I have a printing press for information. But if that email included, some money, it's important that when you receive it, you've got the only version. And I can't send the same money to someone else. Because if I can copy money, like I can copy information, then the money becomes worthless. So we had no way of creating digital scarcity to crystallize property rights online.
And the trust economy, as some people term it, right? Like that's one of the benefits of blockchain, is that whole element of trust and ownership that is hard to replicate in the earlier eras.
Exactly. And what blockchains do is create a decentralized, trustless platform for moving and storing value online. And that value online can be things like Bitcoin, which is sort of the first example of blockchain, but it can be almost anything of value. We use this term token to describe digital assets. And it sounds, whimsical, almost trivial, a token of appreciation. But actually the word token is really appropriate. And you can think of tokens basically as containers for value. They are these empty vessels that you can program to represent anything. It could be money, it could be stocks and bonds, or art and collectibles, or votes, or even aspects of your identity. So with the read, write, own web, we have a new toolkit to represent ownership of the most fundamental assets online for the very first time. And that is a huge shift forward.